We have Representative Walsh and Joe McIntyre who will be moderating today. And you guys have some questions we've given to the candidates. So, Mr. Walsh, let's start with you.
Great. Well, we'll dig right into it. The Employment Security Department, the state of Washington, manages our unemployment insurance system. And it's been crippled by a bunch of problems. Some fraudulent claims for unemployment insurance, and then some administrative managerial trouble. They've shut down several times to try to get their act together. Still don't seem to be quite there. We have people, including people in this crowd, who are 8, 10, 16 weeks behind in unemployment insurance payments that are owed to them. The head of the agency, a woman by the name of Levine, has been in the news and frankly not done very well in trying to do damage control. If you're governor, what would you do faced with an agency problem like ESD has right now? How would you react and how would you remedy this kind of failure at a state agency?
I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead,
well,
Joshua.
Yeah, Kevin and Now Events, thank you so much for putting this on. This is wonderful to be out here and enjoy our freedoms. You know, Jay Inslee would not want us out here, but thankfully here we are in freedom. I don't know if you watched today, but he got kicked out of the Tri-Cities. And one of us is going to kick him out of Olympia, and I look forward to that. But I've traveled to all 39 counties in the state of Washington, and I can tell you just what Jay Inslee says, that he is truly unaware of what's happening around the state of Washington. I served downtown Seattle just a couple weeks ago, and I met with 150 people that we served dinner to. I met 6 to 8 people in first-time homelessness, living out of their cars and living on the streets. Literally, Jay Inslee is killing Washington state with his unconstitutional directives against citizens. And thinking about people who are not getting their unemployment checks for 6 to 8 weeks, and yet we have a gaping open hole that we're sending $1 billion to a Nigerian fraud ring. And what's even more unimaginable than that is he has not even let this person go. Why? Because she's a political contributor and fundraiser for the Democrat Party. Our founder-in-chief, or commander-in-chief rather, said it so clear, you are fired. Right? This person should have been gone by now. And to think that people are suffering across the state of Washington and he continues to sit in a mansion behind a high wall that we pay for, it's mind-blowing that he hasn't taken the leadership. I've had to let people go in my business before when they've not done the job that they're supposed to do. And think about the recklessness of $1 billion going out and how you have an agency in Washington state that's so poorly mismanaged that people now are suffering. Listen, Jay Inslee declared that we're winners or losers, essential versus non-essential. Some people that are desperate to go to work, he's telling people to pick up the phone, call and report these people. We're going to fine them. We're going to put them in jail. We're going to take away their business licenses. That's not the Washington state that I was raised in. It's not American, and it's certainly against our Constitution. So clearly, as governor, if I hear about a situation like that, that person would be gone on day one, and we try to bring charges if we find. And I bet through all this, we're going to find out some fraud happened within that department itself, and people potentially are enriching themselves off that very money that apparently was sent out of the country. So quick, decisive action on that regard.
Chief Cole.
All right, so the Employment Security Department had 2 things that it had to do, right? Protect the people's money and get benefits out to the people who deserved it. They had safeguards in place that have been there for decades. You know, when somebody applies for unemployment, they check to see if they have been employed in this state, and then they send a notification to the employer to verify that that person actually worked there. And then when they get that verification back, they send out the benefits to the employee. That didn't happen. They failed on both of those 2 things. Protect the money and pay the benefits. As soon as that happened, that head of that department would be fired under me, and I would put someone in there that understands how to run and manage a department. Everyone that I appoint to every department head will understand a few things, and that is that the government is there to serve the people, not be our master, not be our boss, but to give the service that is required to the citizens for that department. Thank you for the question, Jim.
All right, gentlemen, the next question. Many know that the state statutes grant emergency powers to the office of the governor. Concerning the recent outbreak of COVID and how the governor has utilized his emergency powers for the COVID outbreak, where has the governor gone wrong? What actions would you have taken in the same challenge? How will you reform the statutes of the state if needed? Lauren, we'll start with you.
All right, so Jay Inslee made himself emperor, right? If you owned a marijuana store or an abortion clinic or a big box store, you could stay open. But if you had a mom and pop restaurant or a church or a gun store, you had to close. And it's because we all know that the virus knows which building to go into, right, and which ones not to, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. Jay Inslee is an absolute idiot. And it's obvious. And it became very obvious early on that he had another agenda. So as governor, there's going to be another virus come down the road, right? This is not the first one we've had, right? We've had AIDS, we've had bird flu, we've had swine flu, we've had SARS. There's going to be another one. So when I'm governor, I'm going to have press conferences with the medical professionals and explain to the citizens what's going on, what they should do to protect themselves, their family, and their business, and what could happen if they don't follow the medical advice. And then as governor, make sure that the supply chain is open for all the equipment that's needed. And then let individual free citizens decide what they're going to do for their family, their business, and their self. That's how you govern a free people.
All right, Joshua?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Of course, during this time, Jay Inslee's picked winners and losers, essential versus non-essential. So I am a home builder and land developer, and I do not receive public funding. So he considered home builders in my industry non-essential. And yet if you receive public funding, magically you are essential. A tile layer in one project versus another project, the virus doesn't know the difference between the funding sources. Yet Jay Inslee took away our ability to provide for our own families. Then at the same time, the issue we just talked about before this, of where we are not getting unemployment for those checks, or the checks for the people who are not able to work right now. It's a very scary situation in Washington State for people who typically in a rising economy are living paycheck to paycheck. And so for me, I'm going to focus on making sure that we never have the essential versus non-essential, because everyone's job is essential. If you're looking across the table at your family, if you're looking across the table at your kids that are you're not able to provide the food for them, I mean the heartbreak situation that parents are in right now, and they want to go to work, yet they're hearing from their governor that you're not allowed to go to work, we're going to put you in jail, we want you to pick up the phone and call your neighbor. That's a really scary situation that we're in. It's part of what we're seeing in downtown Seattle. It's truly socialism, right? And we need to realize that we are in a battle against socialism in the state of Washington State, where we have Shauna Sawant in downtown Seattle even thinking that Jenny Durkin is too conservative, which is kind of unbelievable. Right? I mean, they take over a hill. Their autonomous zone now is their Emerald City, right? They think this is where everything should be coming together. Their leaders are, and all of a sudden they're upset and they're rioting, breaking windows. It's clearly not a racial situation happening on Capitol Hill. It's a lawless situation. And I think lawlessness is actually more dangerous than socialism and communism combined, because if you don't have the laws, then we live in a state where we just are constantly taking away people's constitutional rights. Under Jay Inslee, we saw that was extremely clear, that he was actively taking away our constitutional rights, or he wanted to. I think so many of us in Washington State laid them down. But we have a constitution, we don't have a king. And so this is the time that we in Washington rise up, we reopen Washington, because if we don't, we're going to see this damage continue to go further and further and further. We have rights under the Constitution. Certainly the Fifth Amendment teaches us that we have that with our businesses, that we have economic vitality to provide for our families and the freedom to do so. And when Jay Inslee comes in and makes these dictates, they're just that. They're just a dictate or a mandate, but they're not a law. Even with what's happening with the mask today. I don't know if you just heard about 3 days ago, he was in Yakima. He was not wearing his mask, magically. And he said, well, somebody said, well, you're probably wondering why I'm not wearing my mask. He says, well, I'm enjoying my First Amendment rights. Well, really, all of us enjoy those each and every day, and we're not going to let him continue to try to take those away. And as governor, I'm going to stand up for those rights and make sure that those are always intact, because we have a constitution that supports those rights. They're ultimately given to us by God. And so each and every day I get on my knees and pray to the Lord for his grace over our day. And actually each day I pray for Jay Inslee's salvation. because I'm thinking about what's happening in his life today. We need to continue to pray for the leaders that are around us, because, and of course I pray that he moves on to some new vocation. We're going to make sure that happens. But yeah, a lot more to talk about tonight. But
yeah. Let's expand on the Chop Chaz question. We all watch what's going on up there. We see even just a day ago there was another shooting with a young fella killed. I know you both have faced the question before, what would you do faced with that kind of situation as governor? But I'm going to put it a little differently. What do you think happened in our state that has allowed that situation up at Capitol Hill in Seattle to get to the violent, crazy point that it is? So dig a little deeper than just what's going on right now, and tell me what you see are the underlying reasons that situation has been able to fester.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of contributing situations there. I mean, ultimately it's a sin issue if we're honest about it. But really what we're having in downtown Seattle, there's an addiction issue that's going on, and certainly a rampant rise in crime. When we're all under house arrest, Jay Inslee's letting go 950 prisoners out of jail. You know, under Jay Inslee, assaults have increased on individuals by 20%. They've increased on first responders by 40%. And then murders increased by 41% and rape by 65%. That's just in 7 years. He has no respect for human life. We as a party, Republican Party, have always stood up for human life. That's a platform to what we stand for. And I think now is the time that we speak up against that. Speak for human life. And what we saw in Capitol Hill, that first day, they gave them an inch and they literally took 6 blocks. And so when Jay Inslee was asked, are you aware what's happening? He says, I'm unaware. Well, I wanted to see myself, so I went down there. They wanted it to feel like it's a street fair. They got like an art district. They're painting on the walls. They're painting on the ground. They had booths set up everywhere. But the reality is when you look under the veil, there's people that are violently being assaulted there. If you don't agree with their statements, their free speech zone is turned into very much a control zone. So the very things they've been speaking about against, they're setting up barriers there. They have armed guards there. So finally they believe in border walls. Thank you, President Trump. But we need to make sure that we have swift, decisive action to go in the Chaz zone and clear that out. It is not a summer of love. It's absolute lawlessness. And as I said, that's more dangerous than socialism. I was just in Washington, D.C. a few days ago, meeting with Republican leaders there, and went into what they call the Black House Autonomous Zone. It's right there at the White House, and went at 1 in the morning. And I'm telling you, the police were there. Well, the next day when I walked by on the Republican Governors Association, they pushed them back a block. The next day, another block. Trump wants to enforce the laws in America. We need a leader here in Washington State that will enforce the laws as well, because otherwise our constitutional rights are violated. We can't put up with this. And the thing is, Jenny Durkin, Jay Inslee, he sits behind a wall protected by his security, but he doesn't enforce the laws in Washington State, which is why we've seen rampant growth in crime under the last 7 years. We need to enforce the laws in Washington State and drive these folks out. I mean, he's made us a sanctuary state. And now we're a hotbed for the sex trade. The definition for a sex trade is 18-year-olds and younger boys and girls. Average age, 12-year-old boys and girls in Washington State. If you want to talk about the root core of evil, it's putting 5- and 6-year-old kids into the sex trade. Slavery is alive, and I'm sad to say it's alive here in Washington State. And we need to rise up and protect these people, because what we're seeing at 2 in the morning is the Democrats moving forward with comprehensive sex education, compromising the minds of the young, innocent kids among us. And these Democrats just keep on moving forward, putting Planned Parenthood in the middle schools and letting 13-year-old girls get abortions without parents knowing it. That's why Satanists are walking up and down the steps of the Capitol. And it's time that we rise up. We are called to speak the truth in love, and now is the time. If we don't today, we're going to see another 35 years of Democrat control and the darkness in Washington State continue. We have some work to do, and I need your help.
Chief Culp, the deeper reasons underneath Chop Chaz.
It's because we have become a culture, especially in places like King County, of enabling people, enabling criminals, enabling drug use, enabling all kinds of crime. If you go to King County right now, you can have 7 or 8 grams of heroin on you, and the police will not arrest you because the prosecutors say that they will not enforce it, they will not prosecute. And the reason that they give is because it's not compassionate to put an addict in jail. It's exactly the opposite. You have to enforce the laws. Enforce the laws, and that will bring freedom and liberty to the individual citizen. If we're not enforcing our drug laws, we're not enforcing our property crimes, then it leads to what's going on. We are enabling that crime to happen. And we have to quit enabling the criminals and bring law and order back to our cities and our entire state. We have a lack of leadership in this state. In Seattle, in the government, in the state of Washington, at the governor's office, in the attorney general's office. We have to bring people who have a spine and who understand and have done leadership in their life. I've been a lifelong leader. I served in the United States Army in the 101st Airborne Division. I went through drill sergeant school at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I'm the only veteran that's running for governor. I've been in leadership. I ran my own business. After I got out of the military, I ran my own business for over 20 years, right out of Olympia. Did jobs all around Puget Sound. Led crews, did budgets. And now I'm a police officer. I've been the chief of police for 4 years. I have been in leadership my entire life, and we have a deficit of leadership in this state, and we have to take this state back. So what should have been done down there with Chaz, right? We can pick on Jay Inslee all night, but what should have been done? And if I was governor and things started getting out of control like they were, you know, first of all, let me be very clear. We have a First Amendment right to peaceably assemble, right? We are exercising our First Amendment right now, right? Doesn't it feel great? The death of Mr. Floyd was a crime. From what I saw, he was murdered. So people were protesting that. That's our right. But as soon as it turned to buildings being looted, buildings set on fire, cars on fire, rocks and frozen water bottles thrown at our police, that is no longer a constitutionally protected right. That's a crime. It's called rioting. So as governor, when that happens, I would have the National Guard spun up and staged close to where it's happening. Because the governor is the commander-in-chief of the Washington State National Guard. Jay Inslee's never served in the military. He has no clue. He sent them in there unarmed, unable to protect themselves or others, which is why they're going in there. I would have had the National Guard spun up and staged close to where the action was going on, where the crimes were happening. They would have had the means to protect themselves. And when local law enforcement and the State Patrol called for backup, they would have been there within minutes and not hours or days like happened. And they would have gone in there and arrested the criminals and shut down the riot immediately. You're not going to negotiate with the criminals.
All right. So Jay Inslee is known for his carbon tax activism, his climate change activism. My question to you is, does Washington State have any role to play in the fight against climate change? Is there any policies that should be put in place, like carbon tax or anything they're like to set an example for the world?
The carbon tax is just another scheme to get money out of our pockets into the state coffers for special interest groups. I am not for raising any taxes on anything. It's just another way of Jay Inslee and the far left getting money out of the taxpayers. I'm for individual freedom and liberty, and less regulations and less taxes mean more individual freedom for the citizens. And our government works for us. We do not work for the government. I am not for any tax scheme like that at all.
Yeah, under Jay Inslee, the bureaucracy has exponentially continued to increase. After 35 years of one-party control in the governor's mansion, we can see that when he makes 1,500 appointments, and these Democrats have each and every year for the last 35 years, the size of government has exponentially continued to grow. And right now, it's almost as if we serve government to continue to see that they're supported. You know, under this time of the COVID stay-at-home order, not one government employee has lost their job. If anything else, we've actually hired 1,500 new employees to track and track each one of you. You know, Jay Inslee believes in big government. He believes in taxing and spending. Under his leadership, we've seen a 60% spending increase. Last year, at midnight, they passed a 17% spending increase, $2.7 billion of new taxes in a rising economy. Well, inevitably, we all know, because we've lived this life, but the economy is cyclical. Every 10 years, you see the economy change, and you don't increase taxes and spending in a rising economy. You look for putting money away in a rainy day fund. You look to give tax breaks to the citizens who've been working so hard, but not Jay Inslee. Look for ways that you can increase taxes. You know, we have 50 different taxes in Washington state today, and yet the Democrats want to see that we have a new tax. And it's always been the income tax they push for. Now they're calling it a capital gains tax, but it's still an income tax and it's still against our Constitution. Jay Inslee tried twice to push forward a capital gains tax here, or a carbon tax here in Washington state, and he's failed. It's interesting when he was running for president, you know, where he got the asterisk of support and came home with the tail between his legs. It was all about the environment, right? And they asked him on one of the TV shows, well, what have you done for the environment? Well, he couldn't say he passed a carbon tax. He actually said, well, I wrote a book about it once. That's his qualifications. Yet here we are. I'm a Bible-believing man. I read in Genesis that God gave us the right and the responsibility to care for the earth around us. So I am an environmentalist in that sense, that I am a fly fisherman. I love to be outdoors. I want to care for the streams even better than they do, because the God that made this earth is one I have to be responsible to, not a God that I could destroy, right? Hopefully you follow me on that. But when I'm traveling to central and eastern Washington and I'm talking to people in agriculture, and we have $13.5 billion worth of agriculture and food goods that we ship out of Washington state each and every year, to put cap and trade or like a carbon type tax on those farms would kill our economy. Jay Inslee seems to want his directive is to kill the economy. This is the same guy that allocated $750,000 from our budget last year to do a study on the Snake River dams. You know those 4 dams provide power to up to 800,000 homes? That's clean power. Yet he says he's a green governor. Look at his motivations. They're all for himself to enrich his own pocket and his own special interest. You wonder who his winners and losers during this period of time? Look at who's investing in. Look at his political contributors. Follow the money. You always need to follow the money. So do we need a carbon tax here? Absolutely not. We need to make sure that our economy is moving forward. This is the same governor. We have 57,000 pages of regulations, 6 feet tall. They never sunset in Washington state. We need to sunset these regulations and clear the path forward for small businesses to grow. Typically, in most states, 80% of the jobs are supported by small business. But in Jay Inslee's Washington, it's all about big government. It's all about the big box stores. You know, Walmart's open, Costco's open. But the small box stores selling underwear, t-shirts, that are the same thing that are sold in the big box stores, they're not allowed. He's always benefiting the big businesses, like Boeing. They get a special B&O tax rate. This year, the first bill that Jay Inslee signed coming out of the legislature, an increase in the B&O. It's time that we have a governor that understands that we need fiscal responsibility. We need to cut state government by 25% and leave more money in the hands of the taxpayers. We don't need another tax. We need a clear path forward.
Well, we've actually dug pretty deep into policy here right out the bat. I'm going to change it up and ask a more personal question. Both of you have had private sector experience before getting into public sector work and politics. I'm going to ask you a question from your working life. What was the worst failure you experienced, and what did it teach you? What did you gain from that failure?
Oh boy.
Mayor Freed, you go first.
That's sometimes they're forced failures, really. So I'm a land developer, a home builder. And I started probably at the worst time that you could ever imagine. Started my company in 2005. And it's interesting because I was a marriage and family counselor before that. I don't know how you feel about that. But so I started in land development. Actually, at the same time, I started serving on Bothell City Council. I served there for 12 years, also served as mayor for a period of time. Freedom! It's good. People see we're enjoying ourselves. But through that downturn was one of the most difficult times of my life. And thankfully I had my wife to cling on to and a God to pray to, and found great support in that. But that was a dark time. And I don't know for many of you, if you were in the construction industry, it certainly impacted you. I know 3/4 of my friends that were in home building were impacted by it. And ultimately all of us were impacted one way or the other in the recession. But through it, you learn a lot of tenacity for sure. You learn that it's not just nails and sticks that go into a home, but there's a lot of prayer that goes into it as well. And for me, that's what got me through during that period of time. But so in some sense, I mean, I worked with Frontier Bank, and I owed them a significant amount of money through the downturn, a significant amount. And so there were some dark days there, but through it all, I was able to pay back all my loans. So I only defaulted in the sense of time, but I never defaulted in the sense of having to pay those bills. It was hard. And now during this COVID crisis, a lot of my friends are in the same situation, shut down for 9 to 10 weeks because Jay Inslee said that you're non-essential. And so now we're getting up started again. And it's a driving process to move us forward. But it's that tenacity that we need to make sure that we're representing and understanding what's going on in people's lives. Jay Inslee's been an elected official since 1989. He doesn't understand when it's like, do you know that he has continued to take the salary that we pay for? He continues to live in the mansion that we pay for, and yet he doesn't go on the streets of Seattle and look in the whites of the eyes of the people that I talk to in all 39 counties in the state that we went to and hear about the businesses that are shutting down, hearing about the livelihood, these dreams that people have built and how it's being ripped out of their hands because Jay Inslee literally has threatened you saying, I'm going to send you to jail. This guy's been a bully throughout this whole thing. He's actually said, if your kid is out on the sidewalk, tell them you're going to write them out of their will. And if they don't listen to you, tell them the governor's going to call them. That's sick. And now we're living in a time of division, right? We're hearing that there's so much division. And I'm telling you, this guy is absolutely incapable to move us forward. There's no possible way. When he's saying call on your neighbor, when he's saying you're essential, you're a loser, there's no way this guy can lead the state forward. We need a new leadership in Washington State, and I'm ready to step in that fold for sure.
Chief Colt.
That's an interesting question because I've been on this earth for 59 years, and I don't look at things that go wrong as a failure. I look at them as a life lesson. You know, you learn something from things that go wrong. You learn something from things that go right. You know, I started, after I got out of the military, you know, I worked for other people for a few years. And then in 1988, at the age of 27, I started my own business. You know, 27-year-old starting a business. Didn't know a whole lot about running a business at the time, but I had the will and the tenacity and the drive to do it and provide for my family. And a few years into it, had some contractors that didn't come through with payment, and I got behind on taxes to the state. But I learned a lesson that the state is very hard on people that are trying to make a living. Business owners, that's one big reason why I'm standing up for individual freedom and liberty and getting our government off our backs, lowering taxes, lowering regulations, because they come down on you hard. If you get behind on anything, like I did back in the early 90s, they are unforgiving. I had my bank account frozen for a few $1,000s, right? I ended up getting set up on payments and getting it paid back, but I don't count that as a failure. You know, I was a young business owner and trying to make it through, and I know the struggles of business owners. But a failure, no, it was a life lesson. And I never forgot how draconian our government was and how quick they come down on somebody that's just trying to provide for their family. But good question.
So I'm going to ask a question that kind of goes on that personal note too. We all have backgrounds, which means we get along with people naturally, whether it be fellow police officers, people in business, things like that. Which groups of people are you do you seem to click with and have a good relationship with off the bat? And what are you doing to branch out to the far reaches of Washington State, to people that maybe are in industries that you're not familiar with? What are you doing to get to know the citizens and really understand their point of view when maybe it's not in your background?
Well, I kind of have a diverse background. You know, I served in the military. I went to school both on the east and the west side of the state. Joined the military, worked with a diverse group of people from all walks of life, people from all over the country, different ethnic backgrounds. And then in private industry, you know, working for myself for over 20 years, I dealt with people from all walks of life. You know, my customers were the ones calling me, and I didn't know who they were. Got to know them very well. Did the best that I could to satisfy the customers that I had. And then as a police officer for the last 10 years, you know, I've dealt with good people and I've dealt with criminals and any range in between there. So, but as far as the campaign goes, I obviously relate to conservative, God-fearing, constitutionally supporting Americans. But the message that I have resonates across party lines. You know, I'm getting support from Democrats and independents as well as conservative people, Republicans, because I advocate the rule of law and that our government abides by the rule of this land, which is the Constitution, and that our government should follow those rules. And when the government is within the confines of the Constitution and follows the rule book, it protects everyone equally. And that's why I'm hearing from Democrats as well as Republicans, and they're voting for me. I've heard from a lot of Democrats that have come to my rallies or read my book or seen my website. They know what I stand for. And that's the rule of law and individual freedom and liberty. And they realize that, you know, the Democrat Party has taken a very hard left turn, and it's kind of left them standing in the middle of the road because they want law and order, they want lower taxes and freedom. And that rule of law, when the Constitution is abided by, everyone across the political spectrum is protected equally. And that's liked by a lot of people. So that's how I'm reaching out to not just conservatives, but independents and Democrats. You know, the far left liberals, socialists, never going to reach those people. But the middle of the road, Democrats, independents, definitely, we are reaching to those people, and they're supporting my campaign.
Thank you.
Mayor Freed.
Well, I think I relate to people who like being out in the wind and the cold in the gravel parking lot, for sure. You guys are sticking in there. This is a lot of fun. Out in the paintball. I don't know if we're going to go do some paintball after this, Lauren, but it should be interesting. But I mean, for me, we're all created equal in God's eyes. And so it's so interesting to hear from the other side of the aisle about you're racist or you're bigot or whatever. That's not the lens at all of how I look at the world. I love serving here on the streets of Seattle. I've been up to Vancouver, BC multiple times. My wife and I ran Initiative 27, which is a ban on heroin injection sites, because we saw that the city of Seattle wanted to move forward and open these places that ultimately enable people to continue forward in drug use. So my wife and I went up to Vancouver, BC 5 different times. I literally sat on the sidewalk and talked to, there's 5,000 users that live in a 5-block radius, but I would sit down on the sidewalk and talk to these people that are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and their lives are absolutely broken. The liberal side would tell you that, hey, this is compassion, let them live under a tarp surrounded by garbage and needles, let them continue to do whatever you want, but ultimately what happens there is there's suicide, whether it's an immediate overdose or it's something that happens through a period of time. I'm taught to truly love our neighbor, meaning we need to reach our hand down and help people when they're in a situation of difficulty. Is that moving it down a little bit better? But I mean, my wife and I, we serve over in the Philippines. We go there every year for the last 21 years. We lead high school and college mission trips there, and we work with the International Deaf Education Association, so people in special education. We're called to love them. We go to Kenya, been drilling wells there and building health centers for the Maasai tribe. Also been going to Israel and Amsterdam and other places in the world, wherever we are called to go. I believe that's part of the Great Commission, of where we take that truth and that love and we take it to them. And so there is no lens of which I say, I'm going to judge you one way or the other, but I actually love the diversity that we have here in Washington State. So I love different cultures. I think that's what makes us better here in Washington State, about how we have different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities. I celebrate that. And so for me, who do I relate to? Both? Anyone made in God's image. And that's really all of us here and around the state of Washington.
All right, well, enough of that. Let's get back to policy questions. K-12 education.
Yeah.
Last 10 years or so, the school funding debate in Olympia has been dominated by the state Supreme Court decision, the McCleary decision. And that looked at how the state collects tax money, primarily property tax money, to distribute to schools around the state. That issue the courts have decided that issue was resolved, although there still remain a lot of questions about how schools are funded. And that McCleary decision looked at how the money's collected, but a lot of superintendents and teachers and frontline people in education think how the money's collected isn't the problem. The problem is how the money's distributed to the schools around the state. And this, the current kind of formula that's used to distribute that money is called the prototypical school budget model. What do you think of the prototypical school budget model? Should we keep it? Should we get rid of it? Should we reform it?
Absolutely.
Mayor Freed, you go
yeah,
first.
we should absolutely reform it. On average, we spend around $17,500 per student across the state of Washington, and often the money that gets allocated to these different school districts is based upon the valuation of your property values. So for instance, Bellevue zip codes gets more money for their school districts there, and of course on top of that, then the parents are typically more affluent in those zip codes, so they're able to have booster clubs to even more benefit and buy the top of the line computers, or what are those things called? The not an iPad, but tablets for their students. And then you can go to South Seattle or some other places where they're not as high income zip codes, and so they're getting lesser pay. So where do the more qualified teachers want to go? They want to go to get the higher paying salaries. And so you get this inequity that happens. Yet we need to make sure that we're properly allocating funds to these different school districts and making sure that we're paying people, incentivize people to go to some of those places that are receiving less money. We need to make sure that we're giving them actually more leveled out money. One thing that's very problematic is how we pay our teachers in Washington State, and I support the teachers. I met with the WEA for an interview, and I said, listen, I know I'm a Republican, I know I'm not going to get your support, but I just want to come here and have a conversation. We have a lot of work to do. And I'm going to talk about that in just 1 second, how we fix it. But what happens is they just pay teachers based upon the amount of time that they've been there. So tenure is how you get an increase, not by merit. And of course, that creates an interesting system in Washington State. And I think ultimately at the base of that is the students suffer. We want to make sure that we're incentivizing teachers who are sitting with our students or helping them to move forward. There's a lot of things happening in Washington State where the first time that OSPI has ever mandated that a certain curriculum go into every school district, we have 294 school districts in the state of Washington, is when they mandated comprehensive sex education should go out. And I talked about that briefly, but at 2:08 in the morning, TVW puts on the bottom of the screen, warning content of explicit material. And so now they pass this stuff in the middle of the night and they mandate that all 294 school districts have to do it. They don't have to, everyone doesn't have to teach the math, the writing, the science, and all that stuff. This is what's so important to the liberal side of the party today, which is why I'm such a strong advocate to make sure that we have parental educational choice. We need to make sure that our kids are going to the schools that we choose. Listen, it is the paramount responsibility of the state, it says, McCleary teaches this, that education is. But ultimately, it's we the parents. I have 5 kids, from 21-year-old down to 14-year-old twin boys. And it's my wife and my responsibility to make sure that they have the education that they need. We're the ones that are loving them, making sure that they get it. So we hear from the other side of the aisle that we're so unique. We can choose who or even what we want to be here in Washington. Well, if that's so true, let parents choose the educational choice that's right for them. And how do we get there? We get there through what I call an educational tax credit. So the issue's always been if we send our money to Olympia, we can't send it back to a private school. My kids go to a Christian school, and so we can't send that money back there. And one of the problems that people, even on both sides of the aisle, have with vouchers is if you send the money to Olympia, it comes back with government control. But an educational tax credit allows you to send your money directly to the school of your choice. So that $17,500 on average that we have, if we're paying $2,000 to $4,000 of our property taxes, we get to retain that. We could send it to a school of our choice, or we can retain that money and use it for homeschool, for products, for books, for materials for our school. So I'm a big advocate for that, and I'll be pushing for that when I become governor next year. Thanks, Jim.
Chief Culp, the prototypical school budget model.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be reformed, you know, and a lot of things in education do. And I want to get the control of where our children are educated back to the parents. The parents are in charge of their children, not the state, not a bureaucrat, the parents. And I want to get to where we are actually educating our children on the basics, right? The budget for education has doubled, but the test scores aren't any better. They're teaching our kids a bunch of garbage. And we need to get parental control so parents can choose where their children are going to be educated, whether that's private school or homeschool or public school, even outside of your zip code or your school district. It should be up to the parents. And when we get that, we have competition between the schools. and competition in a free market, what's that do? It breeds excellence, right? Everybody's got to step up their game and make whatever product they're putting out there better. And we need that in the public school systems. Along with that parental choice, I want to see the trades come back into high schools. The trades all across this state are screaming for workers. And a lot of kids don't want to go to college. They don't need to go to college if they don't want to, right? Some of them don't want to come up with that, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. And if we get the trades back into high school, that's a step right into a good paying job right out of high school that a lot of people, that's the path they want. And there's a need for it. So big on parental choice, parents choosing where their children are educated, and I think that the dollars should follow the child.
All right, thank you. Now I want to ask a question about guns. So, as you know, at an event like this, most people are fans of the Second Amendment and are probably familiar with the Washington State Constitution and its wording on the right to bear arms as well. So, what is Washington State doing wrong in that argument about the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms? Where has the state gone wrong, and what would you change in your administration?
Well, the state's gone wrong by not following the rule book, like I talked about earlier, right? The rule book is the Constitution. That tells government what it can and can't do. That doesn't tell us what we're going to do. That tells our government what it can and can't do. And Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington State Constitution says that the right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired. That's one simple sentence. It's very easy to understand. You could have a sixth grader explain that to someone, right? It's very simple. But our governor and our attorney general have never read it, or they don't understand it, or they don't care, right? And we can see that there's a lot of don't care going on in our state government. But back in 2018, when I wasn't asking for a vote, nobody was thinking about an election, I stood up for citizens' rights when it comes to firearms and the right to keep and bear arms. As the chief of police in Republic, I put a middle finger in the face of Jay Inslee and Bob Ferguson and said, I will not violate my oath of office. Public servants take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the state of Washington and the federal Constitution, and I would not violate that oath. That led to me being on the national news. I was on Fox and Friends and Tucker Carlson talking about our rights and our responsibilities. I ended up writing a book called American Cop on it, a #1 bestseller. And I traveled around the state speaking to Republican Party Lincoln Day dinners and people at sportsman shows about our rights, about our responsibilities, and how public servants need to stand up for our rights. Article 1, Section 1. The power is inherent in the people and government is there to protect our rights, right? They weren't doing it. And I went around this state every weekend in the spring of 2019 speaking to groups of people just like you about our rights, about our responsibilities, and what our public servants needed to do to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. That's what led me to running for governor, because people started asking me, please run for governor. And at first I didn't take it seriously, but as it went into the summer and more people came out to hear me speak all over the state, I started taking it seriously and decided, talked to Barb, my wife of 43 years. We have 2 grown sons and 7 grandkids in this state, and if I don't jump in with both feet and fight and take back this state from the radical left, that I would regret it for the rest of my life.
Joshua?
I absolutely support the Second Amendment. I actually think that our state constitution supports our right to keep and bear arms even stronger than our U.S. Constitution. My wife and I enjoy those rights each and every day. She carries a .38 special. I carry a .380. Don't judge me if that's too small of a caliber.
Easy to conceal
I
carry.
used to carry a 40 Glock, and so, but I can carry my 380 right here in my pocket. I only have 25 guns, which apparently is a starter kit to most of my friends. But
Around here it is
for my
anyway.
campaign, they're becoming sharpshooters over here because we've held a couple fundraisers already. We had Firearms with Freed. A dear friend of mine, John Feller, has an incredible gun range in Bothell. He had a lot of resistance when he was coming in Bothell from some of my fellow seat members, but I went and advocated for his right. They were worried about lead poisoning, which was unbelievable. And they just want to truly fight that they didn't want a gun club in Washington or in the city of Bothell. But I fought for it, and it's there. So we held our first fundraiser there. We just had another event a couple days ago doing skeet shooting down up in Lewis County, actually. But we need to see those rights continually supported. We see it's always under assault in Washington state. When something happens, they continue to try to suggest new laws. And thankfully, by God's grace, we have Jim Walsh in the legislature fighting hard, defending our rights constantly, and the crap this guy gets is unbelievable. But we need Mr. McIntyre to be there as well. There's Mr. Sutherland that's fighting for us as well. So there's a lot of great advocates that we have down. We don't have Shay anymore because obviously he's a pastor doing God's work, which is great. But we need to have more gun advocates down in Olympia, because if you don't have your Second Amendment rights, what happens to your First Amendment rights? They want to take them away. And if this stay-at-home, stay-safe crisis that we've been under isn't more clear, Jay Inslee wants to take away all your constitutional rights. He truly is a socialist at heart. And their core being is they want to disband the Constitution. They want to have a monarchy. He wants to be the king. But good news is we have a constitution that supports those rights. And we need more representative government in Olympia. I certainly learned when I was running Initiative 27 to put a ban on heroin injection sites that our courts are absolutely broken and violated. Listen, Jay Inslee has appointed 56 different judges over his last 7 years that are activist judges. One judge I had to go before I fought all the way up to the state Supreme Court so we could vote to keep heroin injection sites out of our communities. She actually is a self-declared activist, tossing aside the Constitution. And now Jay Inslee this year appoints a woman to the state Supreme Court who is also an activist openly. We need people that look at the Constitution as the base of law. Actually, when I recently brought a suit against Jay Inslee in federal court because I saw our spiritual liberties were being stolen away during this period of time. I have a Bible study at my house every Wednesday night, 30, 40 people come. And so I brought my suit forward. Then we went to the most simple level, just ridiculous level for a temporary restraining order. Said I want me and one other person for my Bible study to meet together. So we get to court. A judge appointed by George Bush. The judge turns to the Attorney General on the phone and says, does your client, the leading law enforcer of the land, Jay Inslee, have the right to shut down spiritual gatherings? Well, get this. After 2 weeks, 156 pages, 4 different court documents of the Attorney General say, no, Josh, you can't even meet with one other person in their whole PPE outfit and their own chair. In front of that judge, he had to admit that his client, Inslee, does not have the authority under the Constitution to take away our spiritual liberties. So churches are opening, which is good. My attorneys were in contact with Attorney General Barr that entire time, and Barr sent me the message and say, Josh, that is an absolute victory because it shows that Jay Inslee does not have the rights to take away our ability to worship, and he doesn't have any other rights to take away our constitutional rights that are given to us. So that court case clearly showed that he is just trying to make mandates, but he doesn't have the power to do so. And that's same for the Second Amendment, First Amendment. We need to keep pushing back and push back strong. Now is the time. If we don't, he's going to take even more than he ever has before. Thanks.
Good. All right, well, we're talking about mandates. Let's talk about masks. The governor, working through his appointed head of the state health department, has made a statewide order that people are supposed to wear cloth masks in public. There's a lot of debate over how solid a constitutional legal grounds are on to make that mandate. Tell me what you think about that mandate in particular, and kind of like the previous question on Chop Chaz, tell me what you think about the underlying belief in governance and law that leads a governor to make that kind of mandate on the people of the state.
A governor that makes that kind of mandate on the state is detached from all reality, for sure. Right? I mean, he constantly is trying to take away these rights that people have died and given their lives for in America. And we need to make sure that we're standing up and rising up and making sure that does not happen. When he tries to make a mandate for masks, that's not a law. The legislature writes the laws. Again, it's back to the separation of powers. So he can try to make a mandate, but ultimately we have the rights. We have freedom to make that choice for ourselves. When he chose essential versus non-essential, that was clearly a violation of our constitutional rights because we have the right to work and provide for our families. We should have never shut down. We should have continued to stay open. And today, if you want to wear a mask, right now he's saying have people deny you service. I would say remember those businesses that deny you service. And so when the mask mandate goes away, remind those people that you didn't want to give me any business and I'm happy to take it elsewhere. But we have that freedom in America and we should not let it down. It's wild that here we have Chaz, which he made, now they call it CHOP. I actually call it shot because of all the people that are getting shot down there. It's a dangerous place, it's a reckless place, it's a lawless place, but yet they let them continue to rage. What, Jenny Durkin's down there where it's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people all running around breaking windows of Asian businesses and the like? They're not enforcing laws there, but you law-abiding citizens, put a mask on. We're gonna put you in prison or fine you if you don't wear one. Everything is upside down. What is right is wrong and wrong is right. Things need to change in Washington State. It's time for Jay Inslee to move on. Remember during the COVID crisis, he said this is really hard work. He wished it wasn't on his shoulders. He wishes it was on somebody else's. Well, step aside, Governor. I'm ready to lead the state of Washington.
Chief Colt, the mask mandate.
So we all know that Jay Inslee cares more about our personal health than we do, right? Can I say it one more time? He's an idiot? Okay. So this is the same person, you know, he's saying that he cares about our health and he's putting all these mandates out. This is the same person who in February signed into law a bill that lowered the penalty for intentionally infecting someone with HIV.
Oh, sickening.
It went from a felony to a misdemeanor because of Jay Inslee. And he cares about our health, right? It's all a lie. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear a mask, don't wear a mask. That's called freedom, an individual choice. If you own a business and you want to require your customers to come into your business with a mask on, that's your choice as a business owner. Your customers also have a choice, whether they want to come into your business and wear the mask or to go to someplace else and not wear a mask. It's called individual freedom and liberty. Jay Inslee has no business mandating what we do in our everyday lives. His job is to run the executive branch of the government for the state of Washington, not mandate what we do in our individual lives or our businesses. That's not freedom, that's a dictatorship. And we need to unseat him in November.
All right, on to the next topic. So we know that homelessness is very much a symptom, not so much a cause, and that it varies to many things. We know now that mental illness and drug addiction have a lot to do that end up with homelessness. When it comes to someone with mental illness, severe mental illness, is it appropriate to push forward policies of forced commitment to a facility for them to get treatment? And how can you balance that with also drug addiction? Do you give the individual a choice to say you can go to jail or you can go to drug rehab? What are your feelings about those situations?
I've dealt with that as a police officer at the street level. I've dealt with people who have mental health issues. I've dealt with people who have addiction issues. And under Jay Inslee's leadership, we've lost accreditation to Western State Hospital. That's just piss poor leadership, right? I've taken people to the hospital who have tried to kill themselves. And I take them to the hospital on an ITA, which is an Involuntary Treatment Act, to get them help. They meet with a first level counselor, they talk to them for an hour or two, and then they decide, yeah, this person needs professional help. They need to go to a facility. They just tried to kill themselves. And they will call around the state to every facility, and 9 times out of 10, they cannot find a bed for that person to go to get the help that they need. And they're turned right out onto the street. This is someone who just tried to take their own life. And they're walking out the door of the hospital because there's no place in this state for them. We need to fix that broken system, and it's going to take strong leadership and appointing people to the department heads that understand that we need to be servants of the citizens and not their master. And as far as the drugs problems that are going on, when I was part of the North Central Washington Narcotics Task Force as a narcotics detective for 3 years, I dealt with addicts. I dealt with drug dealers. I put some of them in prison for 20 years because they were dealing that poison in our area. And I've dealt with people at the street level that were addicted and dealing drugs to support their own habit. And we had a zero tolerance policy. You get arrested, you go to jail, you choose treatment or prison. You know, the judge gives them a choice. And so many people have chosen to go to treatment and they get their lives completely turned around. We cannot allow people to continue in the cycle of addiction like the left wants to do because they call it compassion. That's why people come here from all over the United States. That's why this homeless crisis has turned into hundreds of thousands of people. You know, 10 years ago, we didn't have these people living on the street, dirty needles and feces, and this huge problem. But because of lax policies on our narcotics laws, we've attracted people from all over the country, and that's why they're here. The answer is not to build a home for everyone living on the street. The answer to it is to address the core issue, which is the mental health and the addiction.
Mr. Freed.
Well, I think homelessness is as unique as each one of us that are here. There are sometimes people get into an economic situation, they're single mothers, they get an eviction notice because they couldn't make the payment for their rent or for their mortgages. Certainly during this time that we can understand, when people were prevented from working, you get into a situation where you can't make that payment. The unemployment check's not coming, and people get into a very difficult place. And we need to understand that. But truly, the two biggest contributors to homelessness in Washington State, number one is drug and alcohol addiction. 80% of people are struggling from drug and alcohol addiction. And the second biggest contributor is mental health. So 30% of the mentally ill, or 30% of homeless are struggling from mental health issues. July 2018, Western State Hospital was decertified after multiple years of warnings from the federal government. Jay Inslee did not listen. So they came in, wrote a 70-page report, took away $54 million in annual funding, so now we're over $100 million of funds lost. But worse than that, now we see 30% of the homeless, the most vulnerable among us, these mentally ill, wandering the streets across our state, given 30 days of pills and sent out on their own. And at the end of 30 days, they're lost, left, confused, and without the help that they need. We need truly a sphere of influence to make sure those folks that are struggling from mental illness get the help that they need. I was a mental health counselor for many years of my life. I used to serve on the King County Mental Health Advisory Board, and actually some of the kids, all the kids in King County that used to start fires, the little pyromaniacs, would come to me by court order. So I'd meet with them. I could talk about that. It's interesting, 90% of their parents were in 90% of their fathers were in jail, so that's a whole different thing, fatherless homes that we have in Washington State. But when it comes to drug and alcohol addiction, I ran Initiative 27, got me very familiar with this subject for sure, where we have 80% struggling from this because we have a state that does not enforce the laws. Under the Freed administration, we're going to enforce the laws. If you're using heroin on the streets of Seattle or across our state, which I've seen far too many times, you're going to go to jail because you've made that choice. Or you're going to go to a new Pathways to Recovery treatment program. I think by enforcing the laws in Washington State, we're going to see 50% of the homeless population go away, because right now we're known as Freeattle, where people come here because they get all the free resources they want with no requirements put upon them. And you know, we can give away 6 to 7 grams of heroin you carry today without any threat of arrest. It's truly that lawlessness where you got guys downtown Seattle shooting 9-year-old kids at McDonald's, been arrested 70 times. You watch Seattle, it's dying. These folks have been arrested 105 times. When Trump talks about at the State of the Union address how somebody had been killed by somebody who had been arrested 70 times, that's like the JV in Washington State. We have such reckless leadership today that has left us into a complete state of lawlessness here. So we're going to enforce the laws if you're using heroin, because that's true compassion. The compassion from the liberals, just live under a tarp underneath a freeway, just go on your life and do whatever you want. Well, that's not loving your neighbor. So this Pathways to Recovery program, I call it, is using underutilized government facilities like McNeil Island, 350 beds there. There's 2 facilities in Yakima, 250 beds each. There's a facility in eastern Washington in Spokane with 200 beds, not being used today. I want to start with Evergreen State College. There's 950 beds at Evergreen State College. Enrollment is down by 42%, clearly an underutilized government facility. They just spent $40 million to revamp student housing there. So what I want to do is we, the government, are going to provide this facility. We, the government, are going to get out of people-on-people treatment and bring in groups like Union Gospel Mission or the like. Because Union Gospel Mission in this 1-year treatment program actually tells people that you have meaning, you have purpose, and we're going to get you on a pathways to success. We spend $1 billion a year on the homeless industrial complex under Jay Inslee, and yet the problem only has continued to get worse. So this pathway starts with detox, then it moves to recovery, then it moves to job training and apprenticeship programs. For once, finally, the failed social experiment of Evergreen State College will become a place where we'll actually have true life turnaround. Because if you go there today, you don't even get a grade. It's like, Billy, thanks so much for showing up. I hope you have a great job at wherever you go, but it's certainly not a job that is going to pay him the salary you want. Evergreen needs to go away, make it truly a place where we can move people and turn the life around. It's time.
All right, well, I'm going to change it up again and ask something more personal. What's your favorite song and why?
Oh,
Mayor
boy.
Freed.
Oh, easy for me. It's Amazing Grace, and I've heard it in many different ways. I think you know transparently that I'm a Christian, and for me, that's what motivates the core of who I am. And for my wife, we've been married for 23 years, met at Seattle Pacific University. All 5 of my kids love doing ministry, but like when you go to the Philippines, we have worship every morning and night, and we do Bible study. But Amazing Grace has always been a song that's stuck in my heart. And one of the first times I heard it, I lived in Egypt. So I lived in Egypt and Pakistan in my life. I was in Egypt, I was 3 to 7. Pakistan, I was in junior high years. Interesting times with missiles and everything there and car bombs. But I remember I heard it first on pipes, the Scottish pipes. I'm half Norwegian and German, so I don't know why the pipes had it for me, but definitely Amazing Grace. Just to think about, in life we make some decisions, and sometimes, we have sin, but thankfully we have a Savior who's forgiven us for our sins. And sometimes I like to preach a little bit. But I think about the grace of which received, and that grace motivates me to love the people that are around me. It's a huge motivator for me because I've received that grace and I need to extend that grace out to others as well. But that's quite a question. I've never been asked that before.
Chief Colt.
All right, well, I grew up in the grade school in the 60s and high school in the 70s. I listened to a lot of Willie and Waylon, Merle Haggard, Hank Williams Jr., and then in the late 70s, disco came around. I don't have any favorite disco songs, but I've listened to everything. I love every genre of music, even some of the new stuff. But I really don't have a favorite song. I just have a lot of favorite songs.
Jim inspired me. So if you don't have a favorite song, what's your favorite movie? And then I'll throw it back that way. What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie? Well, I like The Godfather. I like John Wayne movies. I grew up on John Wayne movies. I absolutely love The Cowboys. Cowboys, with John Wayne.
True Grit.
Those were excellent movies to grow up on. Taught you about life and how to be strong and stand up for yourself. So I would have to say John Wayne, the Cowboys.
Yeah. Same question, Mayor Freed.
Oh, definitely my favorite movie is any movie my wife wants to watch.
That's a pun. Political answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's complete opposite side of Amazing Grace. It's John Wick 3.
Wow.
Completely opposite of what I just told you of what motivates. I don't know. It's something about John Wick 3. Better than 1 and certainly better than 2. Any John Wick fans here?
That sounds like a few.
All right.
All right, well, back to policy. Ghost bills. This is this thing in Olympia where someone will drop a bill during a legislative session with a title and no text. And they push it through the process, and late, usually in a legislative session, they will add by amendment the body of the bill. And this gets around the usual committee process for review of a bill, and allows them to use a little parliamentary trickery to get bad policy in place, usually at midnight, usually at the end of a session. Now everybody suddenly says, well, they don't like ghost bills, even though they've been using them for decades. It's not enough to say you're against these ghost bills, but tell me what you think the fact that they were used as much as they've been used means about Olympia and how we do law making in this state.
It means they're not listening anymore. It means the courts aren't listening anymore. It means the elected officials aren't listening anymore. It means that there's an assault on the initiative process. When we pass something like, I'm a co-sponsor of Referendum 90, they want to bring lawsuits against it. Initiative 27, they bring lawsuits against it. $30 gas taps, they bring lawsuits against it. We have a broken representative system in Washington State, except for good men like Jim Walsh and the like. But so last year at midnight, we saw $2.7 billion in new taxes pass on what's called a title-only bill or a ghost bill. So these are literally white pieces of paper, like Jim is saying, where the title is at the top. And not last session, but the session before last year in the budget time, they actually passed those $2.7 billion by amending the language at midnight. This is a total violation of the Constitution that says it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We need to take back our government because right now they don't feel that they need to listen to each and every one of you. They've been living under one-party control. Listen, 35 years in the governor's mansion in Washington State, the longest run of any party in America. So they've gotten to a place of just brazen arrogance where they don't think that they have to represent the people anymore. They're going to represent the powerful and well-connected. If you have a lobbyist in Olympia that gets you a seat at the table, Jay Inslee's going to listen to you. Those majority leaders of the House and the Senate are going to listen to you. But if you don't have that powerful, well-connected lobbyist, they're not going to listen. Look at on the beauticians. Last year they had to go down to fight for their rights. Well, guess what? This year Jay Inslee gets his retribution, doesn't he? You're non-essential. This representative government needs to be taken back because right now we have people in downtown Seattle have been electing people and trying to all they do to claw power away from us. I would never sign a budget unless the public has the opportunity to speak. So I served on Bothell City Council. I was mayor for a period of time. When we would have labor negotiations, we'd always bring those out to the public to make sure that the public was engaged in the process. When we passed a budget, we would have multiple conversations with the public to come. Why? Because it's their tax dollars that we're spending. I think of our tax dollars in the form of an investment. When we put our tax dollars out there, we need to see a return on that investment. That's why I oversaw the largest revitalization of a downtown in Washington State. We had $450 million of private investment come into the city of Bothell without raising taxes for 12 years. Because investors saw that we had a vision, that we are a city that was open for business, and we represented the citizens that wanted to make sure that we had a city that was vibrant. And now come to Bothell, please. Come to Bothell, buy Bothell. I think that can be replicated across the state as we finally return the power to the people in an election in November. I mean, I certainly would appreciate your vote.
Chief Culp.
What does it mean? It means that they have no respect for the rule of law and the Constitution, and it means that they have no respect for we the people. Obviously, when I'm governor, I will have 3 tests for any bill that comes across my desk that the legislature wants signed into law. Number 1, is it constitutional? Because the Constitution, as I said before, is the rule book for the government. If it does not fit within the confines of the Constitution, I will not sign it. Number 2, will it help the citizens of Washington State? Not some special interest group. I'm going to only work for one special interest group when I'm governor, and that's the interest group of the citizens of Washington State. And number 3, can we afford it without any new taxes? When I became chief of police in Republic, the first month I cut 25% out of the budget. Just that little bit alone is because of my mentality on the role of government. You know, we need to be responsible with citizens' money. We need to be responsible with our position and obey the rule of law. And these ghost bills absolutely fly in the face of any of that.
All right. I want to get a reading off our main man, Kevin. Are we ready for closing?
15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay. Concerning land ownership and use in Washington State, how do you feel Washington State ranks among the United States in respecting property rights?
I don't think that our state government respects any of our rights. Period. We need to get our government back within the confines of the rule of law. We need to get department heads appointed, and I will appoint department heads that respect the rule of law, the Constitution, and have the same mindset that I do, that government is there to serve the citizens, not the other way around like's going on right now. We have a government and a governor in place that thinks he rules over us and we serve him. That's exactly the opposite of the way it should be. We need to get department heads in there that understand that the servant role of government and that they serve the citizens, not dictate to the citizens. So many departments are out of control. We tax citizens, we fine citizens. Jay Inslee's got the Department of Health out there making sure businesses are following his rules. Otherwise, he's going to fine them $10,000. People just trying to make a living. People just trying to employ people to save their investment and feed their family. That is not a servant government. And I will make sure that our government gets back within the confines of the law and becomes that servant government again, like it was when I grew up. That's the whole thing. I want this government to get back to where it's not lording over us and it's not taxing us and regulating us to death. I want the freedom that I grew up with back in the 70s when I was a kid. That's it.
How many of you here actually own like a farm or some land? Yeah? So I grew up on a farm. My nickname growing up was actually Farmer Freed. So I wake up early in the morning and I get the big bottles to feed my baby calves, which was fun. And then I'd have to go get the eggs from the rooster that would always attack me, that my dad would say, just shush away. Delivered a lot of horses. But throughout my childhood growing up, we lived on the Freed farm up in Bothell. And I would hear from my dad constantly about how our property rights would be taken away, our private property rights. And I saw that suddenly that buffers would put on ditches in front of our house. And through that, government started taking not just 25 feet, but 50 feet to 150 feet. And it's all in the name of caring for the environment. And then we see this move from the Department, Army Corps of Engineers, trying to continue to take away our private property rights. And they say it's all for better water quality, right? And so I made a decision to run for Bothell City Council and continue to push against the Department of Ecology. Certainly as a land developer, I understand how I have to advocate and fight for our own property rights. We have a government that is advancing against those rights constantly, and it's an onslaught. And we need to stand up for it. It's amazing to see that we move literally from a category 1, 2, 3, and 4 in a wetland, which is supposed to have 3 different criteria, whether it's hydrology, vegetation, or dirt, right? Now they're just taking it down to 2 criteria, and then they're increasing buffers from 25 feet to 50 feet to 150 feet. Have you guys all experienced this? Literally, it's a taking of our land, and it's against the Constitution. They're stealing our private property by making these new dictates, and it's coming from liberals who just don't think that we should have the right. And the big assault today is on water rights. If you talk to and you own a rural piece of land and you want to drill a well, you used to just drill it. Then it was $25. Now it's almost like thousands of dollars just to get a well dug. boy, my words. But I'm thinking about, I traveled around a lot, of course, last 6 months, and over the last month, went to all 39 counties, spent a lot of time in central and eastern Washington, and they're starting to put meters on wells. And so these private wells, government wants to come in and put meters on those wells. So those private property rights and water rights are under the assault from a government that continues to grow. Again, it's another right that these folks from downtown Seattle think that they want to just take away from us. And I think about my friends that are apple producers and working in vineyards in eastern Washington. One I visited recently provides apples to 80 countries around the world. There's dictates that are coming from Olympia, from folks that are represented in King County, like Capitol Hill or Queen Anne. They go down to Olympia. They've never set their foot on a ranch, a farm, or an orchard, and yet they're putting red tape on these companies. It's a serious, serious problem today. We need representative government. Listen, we need to have the Farm Bureau at the table. We need to make sure the Cattlemen's Association is at the table in Washington State, so we don't have these socialists from Seattle making dictates on ranches and farms in central and eastern Washington, southwest Washington, and northwest Washington. That needs to change. And as governor, I'm going to make sure everyone has a seat at the table, not just the powerful and well-connected.
Yeah, they tried to bring the sample program for metered wells down here, and it didn't stick. Let's talk about natural resources. Let's talk about fish. Anyone who lives anywhere near the coast knows that our state's Department of Fish and Wildlife has overseen a complete collapse in our state's fisheries here. I want your thoughts on why that's happened. And more importantly, I'd like to hear what you would do as governor to turn around our fisheries and get them back to where they used to be when they were more vibrant.
Well, thank you, Jim. I think it all connects into what we saw. We were one state in the nation of 50 different states that recreational fishing was not allowed. I mean, it's a food source for us. So don't let us go fishing, but don't go to work. I've taken away these rights. I would have never, of course, shut down Washington State. I'm a fly fisherman. That's how I enjoy going outdoors most often when I'm not shooting, is to go on a stream in Washington State, whether it's on the Yakima or one of the lakes over in the Vantage area. A lot of times I go visit my parents in Montana, but that's a whole different story. But to think about the zones on the coast here, they shut down to shell fishing. I mean, that is our right, and we pay for that, and yet it's taken away. All this stuff happens, like the $750,000 study to remove the Snake River dams. It's all in the name of a killer whale feeding program. So Jay Inslee has made the priority 100 killer whales in Puget Sound rather than citizens. But we need to make sure that we're putting people first. Thinking about taking the dams down on Snake River, the argument is that the fish runs are down. They're actually not down, they're up. And so we need to make sure that we are putting people first, making sure that agriculture is supported, that the water sources from those dams is providing to continue to give water to central and eastern Washington, and that we have our streams open. We saw the Elma here, that they took the dams on that and made it so you couldn't even fish there anymore. The runs are doing very well there. I'm sure you're all familiar. This all goes into public lands as well. I mean, on the peninsula right now, I've seen so many times, I've obviously been traveling, but a lot of the trails that we all used to be able to use and enjoy, the Army Corps is magically falling trees in all these trails. So our land that we paid for, that we own collectively, these government bureaucrats are taken away from us. We need to restore our rights, take those rights back, because these socialist type leaders are trying to take those away each and every day. I'll fight for that.
Chief Culp, the fish.
Okay, well, I've been a lifelong hunter and a fisherman. I grew up in the woods. My dad was a hunter and fisherman. My grandpa, same thing. My grandpa on my mom's side was a commercial fisherman up in the San Juan Islands, and my grandpa on my dad's side was a sport fisherman. I spent my childhood on the water and in the woods. And we fished, you know, in the creeks, in the lakes, in the ocean, in the strait, all the time. The problem that's going on in this state right now in our fisheries is we have someone in the governor's office that probably doesn't even know which end of a fishing pole to hold on to. It's not a priority. He doesn't care. He wants to recover salmon to feed the orcas. And don't get me wrong, I love the orcas. They're beautiful animals, right? We need salmon to feed them. But I'm more concerned about citizens and their families getting out on the water and being able to fish. I went out to Westport just a few months ago and talked to the people out there. And there used to be over 300 charter boats that worked out of Westport alone. I'm not talking about all of the other ports around the state, just Westport. 300 charter boats. Each one of those boats has a captain and a crew and facilities on shore that support them, you know, repair facilities. And then you had people coming from all over the United States to go fishing. You have hotels, airlines, restaurants, rental cars, sporting goods. That's a whole industry that's gone because they went from 300 charter boats 10, 15 years ago to only 28. This is Westport alone. Imagine across this state. Because our fisheries are in the toilet. Because our state government doesn't make it a priority. I will make it a priority. And what we need to do is it's basically three things. We need to increase hatchery output. 100%. It needs to happen. We need to thin out the predators. Seals and sea lions can't be left to overpopulate, as well as the birds. There are way too many predators. They eat a lot of fish. And then we need to work on spawning habitat. Salmon need clean gravel to spawn in. We need to work on improving that habitat and get those fish runs back up. You know, right now we have the tribes, sport fishermen and commercial fishermen at each other's throats because there is not enough fish. I want to bring those people to the table and have talked to many of them. Bring them to the table and get those three things as a priority and get our fisheries back to where we can rebuild that industry and then have the availability of fish so families can go out and get food for the table and food for the freezer. We need to bring it back the way it was when I was a kid in the 70s, where there was plenty of fish for everyone. So that's going to be a priority when I'm governor.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Before we get to the very last question, I'd like to have everyone give you a round of applause for what you've done so far. Let's give them a round of applause. It takes a lot of guts to run for governor, and it's a long road. So my question is, we know that a Republican is going to challenge Jay Inslee. We know that for sure. We don't know who it is yet, but we know a Republican is going to go up against Jay Inslee. The question is about right now. Why should Republicans and others consider voting for you this primary?
It's very simple. I stood up for citizens' rights back in 2018 when I didn't need a vote, didn't need a donation in my campaign, and I'm running for governor because I was asked to by citizens who saw that I have integrity and I will stand up when nobody's looking. Nobody was looking at me. I didn't have a platform back in 2018. Stand on it. I didn't have a platform back in 2018. I'm not a career politician. Nobody knew who I was. I just stood up for the citizens that I worked for, and that got me on the national news. And people saw what I did back then when I didn't have anything to gain but my career to lose. And I will do the same thing as governor. I'm running because I was asked to. I'm not the establishment candidate. I'm not the media's candidate. I am from We the People, and I will stand for We the People because that's who I am.
Mayor Freed, same question.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming out tonight. By the way, when you get a little sick tomorrow, it's not COVID, it's pneumonia. Goodness, thank you, Kevin, for the heaters up here. They've been very enjoyable. No, not really. Well, I just believe with the myriad of failures that we see here from our governor, I've seen them with my own eyes across the state, that it takes a depth of experience. I've been running my own company for 15 years doing land development, dealing with growing bureaucracies across the state where you have to go to that counter to get that permit, where you have to fight to make sure that your project gets through. It took me one time 2 years to get a 6-unit townhouse project through the city of Seattle. Unbelievable. And I love other jurisdictions like Kitsap County or Snohomish County. You get them through in a month. We need to see more of that customer service type thing. But Running my own business, I had big budgets that I've been running through my business, whether it's a $50, $60 million budget to push through and making sure that making payroll, making sure that you're moving your company forward through the deepest, darkest times of the Great Recession. You certainly learn a lot of tenacity, what it takes to push forward. I understand what it takes to run a budget. As I worked in the city of Bothell, I served there on the council for 12 years, and as I said, I served as mayor for a period of time. We were able to have that largest revitalization without tax increases. I actually was able to use funds to double the size of the park, to purchase open space, to give tax breaks to seniors in the city that were in a difficult time. This is all possible. You'll hear from the Democrats that it's not. It is all possible. What does it come from? It comes from understanding how to have economic recovery. The essential job of the governor next year is making sure that we reduce the burden on small businesses that are creating jobs in Washington State so we can move forward. My family's been dedicated to service here and around the world. As I said, serving in the Philippines, serving in Kenya. I've served on multiple boards, the Vital Solutions Board, Protect a Child Today Board. I've served on King County Mental Health Advisory Board and also the Eastside Transportation Partnership, fighting to make sure that we have congestion relief, where you hear from a lot of those folks that they always just want to have new programs of light rail without any focus on congestion relief. That's what we need to focus on. So I'm going to be a governor that serves the citizens of Washington State. As I'm elected, I'm not going to take a salary. I'm going to donate it to a nonprofit homeless shelter. For me, it's very important that the citizens of Washington State know that the heart of service, I want to serve Washington State. Too many people go to Olympia and get connected with selfish special interests, or they're enriching themselves off the initiative process. It's time that we have a servant leader in Olympia. I've run initiatives. I know some of my competitors, our competitors, have done that. I've run a no new gas tax initiative. I'm a co-sponsor of Referendum 90 to end comprehensive sex education. I'm so proud of the organization across the state that got a record number of signatures. Right? Huge. And some of you you're probably all here collecting signatures during the COVID crisis. We got 270,000 signatures. We only needed 129,000. We set a state record. This is the year of turnaround in Washington State. This is the year we've been waiting for 35 years. It's time for a new governor who truly represents the citizens of Washington State, not just special interests. So certainly I'd appreciate your vote. Go to freedforgovernor.com and look forward to the course that is ahead for all of us in Washington State. It's time we get us back on the right track.
All right. One more time, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice job. Nice work.
I want to make sure we say thanks to Jim Walsh and Joel McIntyre for moderating today. They did a great job for us. And then also, where is Matt Hedgepeth? We're actually on his paintball course, Elma Paintball, and donated the use of this facility for us to come out here today. This semi-trailer that's behind me as well, donated. The coverage that we did here today is all donated.